everyone. 안녕하세요. This is Jeon and you are listening to Understanding Korea one story at a time. If you've been following along, you know we are in the middle of a special K-book uncover series where I dig into important Korean books that for mystery reasons still haven't been translated into English. In October, we started with June 1987 Uprising, 87년 6월 항쟁 by Kim Won, a forensic look at Korea's June 1987 uprising. In November, we started to zoom out to something bigger and messier. 유시민's 나의 한국 현대사, My History of Contemporary Korea. Last week, we talked about the twins born in the ruins of the Korean War, industrialization and democracy. We left off with the younger brother, the military regime taking total control. This week in the newsletter, I wrote about Barracks State. I wrote about the miracle on the Han River, the export numbers, the GDP growth. But here on the podcast, I want to talk about something you cannot see on a graph. I want to talk about the human cost of that miracle. I want to talk about what it feels like when your country turns into a military boot camp and what it takes to say no when everyone else is saying yes. So think of this episode as the behind-the-scenes commentary track. Same film, different angle. Let's pick up where last week left off. At the end of part 1, we were standing in a place Yushimi calls Ground Zero, Korea in the late 1950s. War ruined everywhere. GDP per capita at $81 a year. A society that looked less like a country and more like a crowded emergency shelter. Out of that rubble came the twins. April 19, 1960. Students and citizens topple an authoritarian president, Lee Seung-man. That's the democratization twin. May 16, 1961. General Park Chung-hee rolls in with tanks, shuts down politics, and says, enough chaos. We are going to survive first. That's the industrialization twin. Same father, Yushimi says, different mothers. The father is the people's desire for future. The mothers are two very different ways the state responds to that desire. By the time we reach the 1960s and 70s, the younger twin is firmly in charge. In part 1 was about a refugee camp trying to become a country. Part 2 is about that country turning itself into a barracks. Before the barracks, the newsletter version of part 2 starts with a detour, and I want to expand on it here. I realized as I was writing that if I just say, according to Yushimi, the 1960s were Barracks State, that sounds like a normal historian doing normal historian things. It doesn't capture why his voice hits so hard for Koreans of a certain generation. Yushimi is not just an observer. He has been inside almost every institution he writes about. The university movement, the courts, the legislature, the welfare state. So the book is not a neutral timeline. It's a reckoning. So look at the scene 1, the young man who refused to look away. In the newsletter, I painted 3 snapshots of Yushimi. The defiant student in handcuffs, the lawmaker in white pants, and the minister who quietly rewrote the healthcare system. Here, I want to slow those frames down a little. Picture the first scene again. It is the mid-1980s, military rule, anti-communist hysteria. Yushimi is in his 20s, a student at Seoul National University, and the government has decided that campus activism must be a North Korean spy plot. They label it the Seoul National University framed spy case. He is arrested, handcuffed, and paraded in front of cameras. If you grew up in the West, you might imagine the classic perp walk, head down, maybe a coat over the face. Shame is part of the performance. Yoo Si-min does the opposite. He lifts his head, looks straight toward the courthouse and the cameras, and shouts a curse at the regime. For years, people remembered it as 전대가리 개들아, which literally sounds like you blockheaded dogs of the dictatorship. Later, he clarified that what he actually yelled was closer to 전대가리 깨져라, something like may your thick heads crack open. It was not a slogan, it was fury. I always imagine the police officers around him thinking, you are really doing this on national TV? And Yoo Si-min thinking, if you have already taken my freedom, you do not get to take my tongue. That same stubbornness shows up when he writes his statement of reasons for appeal, 항소 이유서. In prison, he was not allowed to draft. No scratch paper, no scribbling, and revising. So he does the only thing he can. He writes the entire text in his head and memorized it. Then, one day, they hand him the official manuscript paper, the square ruled pages used in Korea that hold 200 characters each, and he begins to pour it out onto roughly 100 sheets, the length of a short book. It takes him about 14 hours of writing in total, spread over 3 days, but it is still essentially one continuous draft, not something he keeps rewriting. And here is the important part. An appeal is supposed to be about you. Please reduce my sentence. Please recognize my innocence. Yoo Si-min refuses that script. He flips the courtroom and says, essentially, the real defendant here is not me. It is the regime itself. He quotes the Russian poet Nekrasov. He who does not feel grief and anger at the sight of injustice does not truly love his motherland. There is a whole generation of Koreans for whom this document was their first encounter with Yoo Si-min. Not on a TV variety show, not as a minister, but as a young man saying, if you love this country, you should be angry. Here is the second scene, white pants in a black suit house. Fast forward 20 years to 2003. Korea has held free elections. The dictatorship has formally ended, although a lot of its habits are still alive in people's heads. Yoo Si-min is now elected to the National Assembly. The first day is a big day. It is like the first day of school meets a royal ceremony. Every lawmaker comes in wearing a dark, serious suit. This is how you show respect for the state. Then there is Yoo Si-min. White pants, casual blazer, easy smile. In the newsletter, I showed you that photo. Audio only. Let me translate it into feeling. He looks like the one cousin who shows up at a very stiff family wedding wearing sneakers and a green. Not because he does not care, but because he cannot stand the idea that love only counts when you wear a tie. Conservatives were furious. They said he was insulting the National Assembly. Some literally walked out. Yoo Si-min's answer was simple. I wanted to break the authoritarian culture that dominates this place. To me, that is the through line in his life. He is never rebelling for the sake of rebellion. He is trying to poke holes in the leftover habits of dictatorship, those quiet assumptions that say, this is serious, so you must all look the same and shut up. And the third scene is the minister and the hospital bill. Then something interesting happened. The rebel cuts his hair, puts on a proper suit, and accepts the job of Minister of Health and Welfare under President Roh Moo-hyun. For some activists, this is where their story ends. They go into government, they become reasonable, they administer the system they once opposed. Yoo Si-min does something a little different. He takes the same moral energy that wrote that appeal statement and tries to pour it into policy. At the time, South Korea had national health insurance, but catastrophic illness could still destroy families. Cancer treatment, long hospital stays, complex surgeries, people went bankrupt or they simply gave up on treatment. Yoo Si-min and Roh Moo-hyun administration pushed through a reform that kept the share patients pay for serious illness. For critical care, the state would shoulder most of the cost. If you are a Korean citizen with a critical diagnosis, the national insurance would cover about 95% of your costs. You pay 5%. For me, it's personal. Jeon, the co-author of this Substack, has gone through cancer treatment twice. She's a webtoon artist, not a hedge fund manager. Under the system, Yoo Si-min helped the design. She was treated without being financially destroyed. I think about that every time I read the chapter where he explains what welfare means in a country that has always been told to tough it out. If you live in the United States and have ever been a hospital bill like me, this is where the story hits home. This is what happens when someone who shouted at a dictatorship in his 20s decides, in his 40s, to sit down with civil servants and spreadsheets and quietly change the rules. There is one more image of Yoo Si-min that shapes how people read the book. In 2004, the conservative establishment tried to impeach President Roh Moo-hyun. This is not like the mass candlelight protests that ousted Park Geun-hye or the light stick siege that brought down Yoon Suk-yeol. This is an elite move by parties and lawmakers who hate Roh Moo-hyun's background and style. On the day of the impeachment vote, TV cameras captured scenes from inside the National Assembly that look like something between a rugby match and an exorcism. Yoo Si-min is in the middle of it. He shouts, he fights, he gets physically restrained, and at one point literally carried out by his arms and legs. There are photos of him afterward in the hallway, face crumpled, eyes wet, trying to speak to reporters and failing. You can agree or disagree with his politics, but it is hard to look at those images and say, yes, just another cynical politician. Whatever else it is, he is not phoning it in. Years later, the same man is doing his awkward wave dance in a yellow jacket at a memorial concert of Roh Moo-hyun, or wearing a glittery jacket in a Progressive Party commercial. It is both endearing and a little painful. There is a sense of someone who has thrown his entire body into the project of making his country slightly less cruel. And that is the person whose lens we are borrowing. Now we can finally step back into the 1960s and 70s. Under Park Chung-hee, the state decides that the only way out of poverty is discipline. Not just economic planning, but moral and emotional discipline. Yoo Si-min calls that the Barracks State. If you were a child then, daily life didn't just include school and homework. It included marching drills, synchronized calisthenics, anti-communist pledges, and the Charter of National Education that told you, in more elegant Korean, You are not born to be happy. You are born to serve the nation. The logic is brutally simple. We are poor. We are surrounded by enemies. Individual happiness is a luxury we cannot afford. So smiles are suspicious. Long hair is suspicious. Sad songs are suspicious. Anything that smells like softness is treated as a threat to survival. If you've ever wondered why Korean pop culture is so obsessed with uniforms, rules, rankings, and tests, this is one of the roots. Why people accepted it? From our current vantage point, it is tempting to say, why didn't people resist more? Why put up with all that control? Yoo Si-min keeps coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He argues that in the 1960s, most Koreans were still stuck at the bottom. Food, shelter, basic safety. The industrialization camp, the younger twin, promised to take care of that base layer. We will get you rice. We will keep the North at bay. We will build an economy out of nothing. The democratization camp, the older twin, was reaching for the top of the pyramid. Dignity, freedom, self-actualization. The tragedy, he says, is not that one of them was right and the other wrong, but that Korea was forced to choose between them before it could afford both. If your child is hungry and one side says, we must have free speech, and the other side says, we will make sure your child eats, you do not need a PhD in political theory to guess which way many people will lean. This is the uncomfortable part. It is easy to condemn the regime, harder to see it with the fact that ordinary people, including many who later joined the democracy movement, spent their youth quietly cooperating with the Barracks State because they were tired of hunger. In the early 1960s, South Korea's export numbers are tiny, a few $100 million. The country is often described as resource poor and hopeless. Park Chung-hee's government throws everything into changing that story. Highways and bridges, steel mills, shipyards, massive loans from abroad that will have to be paid back later. The slogan is 잘 살아보세. Let's live well. If you look only at the graphs, the result is miraculous. Within a decade, exports jump from around $100 million to several billion. A generation grows up that has never known war, only work. For the first time, parents can hope that their children will not be as poor as they were. Yoo Si-min calls this the shift from desire for survival to desire for growth. You no longer dream of just staying alive. You dream of owning an apartment, sending your child to college, maybe buying a car. But there is a cost, and it is paid by bodies. The place where that cost becomes most visible is not in the Blue House or in the cabinet meeting room. It is in a low attic in the Seoul's garment district. Picture rows of young women and teenage girls bent over sewing machines. 16 hours a day, no ventilation, no days off. The Labor Standards Act technically existed. It limits working hours. It mandates rest days. On paper, these women are protected. In reality, the law is a ghost. Factories bribe inspectors. Violations are ignored. When your family is poor enough, you do not quit because every paycheck, no matter how small, keeps rice in the bowl. This is where Jeon Tae-il appears in Yoo Si-min's story. Jeon Tae-il is not a famous union leader or a politician. He is a young tailor who takes the law seriously. He reads the Labor Standards Act and cannot believe how different it is from the world around him. At first, He does what good citizens are supposed to do. He petitions. He writes letters. He asks officials to enforce the law that already exists. Nothing changes. So on November 13, 1970, Jeon Tae-il walks into the street near his workplace, carrying a copy of the Labor Standards Act. He douses himself in gasoline and sets himself on fire. His final cries are not about ideology or revolution. We are not machines. Let us rest on Sundays. Do not waste my death. Yusimin treats this moment as a crack in the myth of the miracle. Up to this point, the industrialization camp can say, yes, things are harsh, but look at the results. We are escaping poverty. It is all for the nation. Jeon Tae-il's fire interrupts that sentence. He forces a different question. What kind of nation are we building if people have to burn themselves alive just to be treated as human? If you visit Seoul today, you can still find a small memorial to Jeon Tae-il near Cheonggyecheon. Office workers walk by on their lunch break, often without stopping. But the fact that the memorial exists at all tells you something. The country decided that this one young worker's body mattered enough to remember. Yusimin places Jeon Tae-il at the center of the story because he embodies the collision between our two twins. The industrialization twin says, endure a little more, think of the future. The democratization twin whispers, but at what point does endurance become erasure? Jeon Tae-il's death does not immediately topple the regime. Park Chung-hee stays in power for almost another decade. The Barracks State tightens, then eventually implodes in its own violence. Yet, from this point onward, the desire for dignity cannot be pushed completely underground. It will resurface in worker movements, in student protests, in the grave of Gwangju, and later in the streets of June 1987. One thing I love in the book, My History of Contemporary Korea, is Yusimin's insistence that history is not a list of events. It is a story of what people wanted. In the 1950s, people wanted to survive. In the 1960s and early 1970s, they wanted to grow, even at terrible cost. By the late 70s and 80s, another desire gained weight. The desire to be treated as citizens, not tools. Yusimin even uses this lens to explain today's older conservatives. He says many of them knows the dictatorship was cruel. They remember the censorship and the fear. But they also remember rebuilding the country with their bare hands. Voting for the Conservative Party can feel like a way of saying, my life, my sacrifice mattered. If you dismiss them as brainwashed, you miss the deeper desire for recognition. You do not have to agree with their politics to understand that feeling. Most of us, regardless of ideology, want to believe that the hardest parts of our life added up to something. That is what makes Yusimin's book more than a left-wing takedown of the right. It is an attempt to write a history where both the industrialization camp and the democratization camp are recognized as part of the same story, driven by different fears and hopes. In this episode, we stayed mostly in the 1960s and 70s. We met Yusimin as a rebel and as a minister so that we could trust the lens he is offering. We walked into Park Chung-hee's Barracks State and felt why it was both suffocating and, in a brutal way, effective. We watched Jeon Tae-il's fire crack the surface of that miracle. In part 3 of the newsletter and the next episode of this podcast, we are going to pick up that crack and follow it into 1980s. As we move, I invite you to keep asking yourself 2 questions, the same ones I ask my readers. In each period, what were ordinary Koreans most desperate for? And who was willing to listen to that desire, and who tried to silence it? If you would like to read the full written version of part 2, along with the images and links I mentioned, you can find it on my Substack, Understanding Korea One Story at a Time. The article and the podcast are designed to talk to each other, so I hope you will enjoy both. Thank you for listening, for caring about this corner of the world, and for spending your time with me. 오늘도 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. We will pick up the story in the 1980s next week. Bye!